This is the Authority Company podcast, in-depth conversations with leaders that are shaping our future. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and as an immigrant's kid, I love a good old underdog story. And today, we're going to talk about how underdogs are disrupting the status quo with Dr. Imamu Tomlinson, the author of the new book, Less Than 1%. Mu, as his friends call him, is a doctor and healthcare CEO, and in his book, he reveals the secret patterns of extraordinary success through stories of Steph Curry and the Giants' shocking Super Bowl wins over the New England Patriots. We're getting into all of that and also why you just can't predict success. Dr. Imamu Tomlinson, welcome to the show. How are you?
Awesome. How are you doing? Thank you for having me.
I am equally awesome. So I want to start this conversation now because, your book's all about disruptors, and we are recording this episode shortly after the Eagles stunned the world by defeating the Kansas City Chiefs and robbing them of a three-peat. And it's, your book, you write a lot. You do. And the reason I'm bringing this up is you write about sports in your book. So I'm going to bring it up here and this idea of disruptors. So in the book, you talk about how people like Steph Curry, it disrupted systems. So I want to bring it back and look at the dark side of disruption. So if you look at Steph Curry now, for the last decade, he has disrupted the game by changing it. People now, whether you're 5 feet tall or 7 feet tall, you're chucking threes. Now in 2025, there is a lot of people saying that this 3-point disruption has actually tainted the league. Like, it's boring to watch. And I'll use the Elon Musk of it all without getting into Elon Musk. Elon Musk, a great disruptor, one of the great entrepreneurs of all time. But you've seen what being a disruptor, the after effects of him disrupting with Twitter is. So let's get into this, like the dark side of disruption that,
Right.
On the face value, like you mentioned in the book, it's important to have people like this change things. But when that change goes too much, it's like, I often joke, Doc, is that one thing we're great at as human beings is overcorrection. Like, not only we correct, but we overcorrect ad nauseum. So tell me about this sort of like dark side of disruption.
So let's back up a little bit, right? So it's you talked about Philadelphia winning, right? Again, our need to predict is the problem. Our need to predict. We want who's going to win. We always want to go with who's the favorite. But the truth is that we never really can truly know the favorite, right? When you really sort of dive down into it. But let's talk about Steph Curry. So Steph Curry, how did he disrupt the game? He disrupted the game by, having a coach and Coach McKillop that allowed him to shoot the ball whenever he wanted to. And he was fortunate enough to come in the league and be able to have that. And so the challenge with Steph Curry is that disruption is not necessarily shooting threes. The disruption is making threes, and making difficult threes. And that's where, when you look at what we want as a society, we want standardization. So everybody looked at the Steph Curry model and said, well, let's take threes like Steph Curry, but they didn't really focus on making threes. And that's, I think, why you're seeing a league now that is rife with people just sort of chucking the ball. I write in the book, I talk about the analytics behind basketball. And the goal is to play as fast as you can, to take as many threes as you can, so you can make as many threes as you can. The challenge is there's this small thing called a 3-point percentage, which is why Steph Curry has won so many championships. Just shooting them isn't enough. You have to actually shoot them at a high rate. The last thing I would say about disruption, I don't know if it's a dark side or not, but you can have a disruptor. Steph Curry is pursuing greatness, right? And that's how he disrupted the league. He tried to do something very different and wanted to pursue greatness as a result of that. But then with everybody adopting that mindset, right, that's the standardization, right? That's the kind of thing where you say, okay, we're all doing the same thing. So what does it need? Another disruption.
Interesting. So it's funny. So it's almost like a disruptor has like a shelf life, because then all of a sudden everyone catches up to the disruptor. And then now, like you mentioned, someone has to disrupt that. And you mentioned analytics, and that's a big part of it. Like they've run the numbers, the nerds have run it and said, hey, listen, even though your 3-point percentage may be low, the impact of hitting the threes outweighs the negatives of missing. And it's sort of the after effects of analytics in sports in general. I mean, you're seeing it in baseball. If you watch baseball, probably if you're under 40, you're not watching baseball. But if you're over 40 and watching baseball, they're either hitting home runs or they're striking out. because analytics say you're better off having the launch angle that you're swinging upwards, so the ball's always going in the air. So you're no more ground balls, base hits. It's always home runs. And again, that's a disruption in itself. The idea of, oh, okay, we've got to play this. And, if you want to use another sports metaphor, it's like the Billy Bean model of it all, like the importance of getting on base, Moneyball. So what was it about disruption for you? Because you're in a world of healthcare where, man, as you know, Doc, we don't want to disrupt anything. Let's keep it going. Let's make sure everything's billed accordingly. If you live in a certain market, you could charge X amount for something. Or I even saw a stat that there's some hospitals, depending on what floor you get a procedure done, the price is different. So tell me about disruption in your industry.
Yeah, so just go back a little bit to analytics, and I'll jump to healthcare in a second. So with analytics, the challenge is that when everybody is using the same analytics to try to get the same result, you just have to get better faster than everybody else is getting better so you don't get worse. But you haven't really pursued greatness. And that's where I think if you look at baseball or basketball or healthcare, if you're all just doing things the exact same way, you're not going to get the best outcomes. You're really just trying to get incrementally better. Healthcare is interesting. I always joke with people that healthcare is the slowest moving, fastest moving industry. At some level, right? It really doesn't move very fast. I mean, if you really think about it, but there are all these pressures on healthcare that makes you think that one day you're going to wake up and it's going to change. One day you're going to wake up and have a watch that does your blood pressure and your pulse. Oh, wait, we're here, right? So it comes, it's insidious in that regard. I think healthcare disruption, the biggest disruption, I talk about in my book, the idea of what we did in our company in the emergency department. It used to be that in the emergency department, you got seeing patient after patient after patient, right? That was taken from the triage system from wars. And so, 50 years later, we're still going from patient to patient to patient, when inevitably, if you have 2 minutes, just call it something crazy. It took you 2 minutes to see a patient, which it takes longer than that. But then the 10th patient would be at 20 minutes, right? So you've already had a significant delay. And what they did in that disruption, they said, well, let's see patients in a parallel process. Let's see them kind of all together and then decide who needs what. Some people need things quickly. We can get them in and out. Other people may have to stay longer. So we'll slow that process down and do more. And I think right now, healthcare is ripe for, I think, almost a financial disruption. The way that we connect with patients. If I got a chance to, if unfortunately you had to see me for something bad in the emergency department, maybe the relationship is between me and you. You get to decide how much you pay me and not some insurer that sort of gets in the way and says, how much should I? So I think there's lots of disruptions that could come in healthcare. To your point, though, I think people are scared. I think people are scared to do something that has been monolithic in its progression throughout time. But I think it's time for it to be disrupted.
Nice. It's funny you talk about your industry being a bit like cutting edge, but also slow. I mean, a perfect example is the stethoscope. People don't realize this. Like, it took, I think, you could correct me if I'm wrong, it took like 20 years before the stethoscope became a standard way of checking someone's heart, because the industry at the time was like, I'll just put my hat against their chest. This is perfectly fine. So, right. So, I mean, that's a perfect example of it, right?
Exactly. And you think now we actually can do echocardiograms in the office at the bedside with a small device that can link up with your phone, right? So I totally agree with you. I think it's a slow moving thing. I'm optimistic, and that's the second tenet of being a great disruptor is optimism. Even in the face of terrible odds or in the face of an industry that looks like it's not moving forward, I think we can do better, and I think it will get better.
That's awesome. That's great. Yeah, I love optimism too, but we also have to be practical about it. And one of the things that's, I often joke that capitalism sometimes gets in the way of good, even though I say this too, Doc, it's the best ism, because we've tried the other one. The communism doesn't work. Socialism doesn't really work, but like capitalism works. But the fact that capitalism gets involved in the world of healthcare, that's where a lot of the stuff runs off the rails, right? Because sometimes you kind of have to remind people in the industry, oh, by the way, these are human lives.
Yeah.
Better. It's not just numbers on a pie graph or numbers in an Excel spreadsheet, right? Is that sort of like the inner struggle for when it comes to the corporate side of healthcare, where sometimes you're so detached? I mean, obviously you see patients, but for most people in that corporate healthcare space, they never see a human being. So all they see is that statistic, or going back to the analytics of it all.
Yeah, let's look at business in general. The best companies throughout history didn't try to make money. They tried to deliver something to the world that hadn't been there. They tried to impact the world in the way it hadn't been before. And as a result, they made money. And so I think that, to your point, when people are diving into healthcare solely to make money, they lose the focus on why they're there. There's a corollary here, private equity, which is not a bad thing. Let's face it, right? I mean, if it wasn't for private equity and sort of investment and large dollars being invested into industries, we wouldn't have many of the amazing industries we have now. But in healthcare, it gets a little bit perverted insofar as people were throwing money, to your point, into healthcare to try to create efficiencies and to create a profit. And to your point, when you're going in for your appendicitis, you end up being a number rather than trying to do the best for patients. For us, we've been around, Vituity's been around for 50 years. And the way that we've stayed around and been, pretty successful is by trying to impact the world. And our number one goal is improving lives. So we don't have a dollar amount that, a number that we're trying to get to. Every year we try to improve more lives than we did the year previous. And I think with that goal, you can stay on target and you'll do well.
I love to rib doctors when I talk about the idea of business and medicine, because as you know, Doc, when you go through medical school and even your bachelor's, the idea of like how to run an office, how to balance a statement, like they don't teach any of that. And for someone like you who's incredibly educated, I mean, you got the MBAs, you got a lot of acronyms after your name, but tell me about your sort of come to Jesus moment where you realize when you got outside of med school, like, oh shit, now I got to be an accountant. I got to know how numbers work. Like, what was that like for you?
For me, it was a little different. So I'm the only person in my family that decided to pursue healthcare. They're all, accountants, and my dad's a serial entrepreneur. So the idea of doing medicine, that approach to me, I think, was a little bit different. And I think if you think about it, most physicians actually have that entrepreneurial spirit at some point, but there's only so many things that can hold in your head. So I think for me, individually, I was very cognizant. I did not want to get in a situation where my only knowledge base was in the clinical part of medicine, and tried to seek out resources. Biggest shout out to Vituity, though, getting this role as the CEO 8 years ago. And as I write in the book, I may not have been the best candidate at the time, but they saw something in me that maybe I didn't even see in myself. And some of that is that alternative way of looking at it, right? I mean, and you have to have also, just to say, great people around you. I have a great team around me. And my first instinct when I don't know something is not to try to figure it out. It's to find somebody who knows it and can teach it to me, which I think is a very different skill set.
Awesome. Well, in the book you write about societal norms, and I think for most people, doctors, high performing, they don't need to lean on people. There's that great line from that movie in the 80s. It was Alec Baldwin. It was called Malice. And it was like he was being interrogated about, and he was like the surgeon, and he goes, I'm a god. Like there is like a god-like sort of mindset when you're a doctor. And when you're a god, Doc, as you know, you don't need anybody's help. So
right.
But it seems like you were able to adapt to that, coming from a family of entrepreneurs, knowing the fact that you needed to have a good team around us. But generally for a lot of doctors, that is a struggle, that the idea of even asking for help.
Yeah. I mean, the first tenet of disruption for me is disagreeableness, right? And so you think about it, to think that you know something, you have to be agreeable. You have to identify that, hey, everything in the world is right and I know most of it. But my first instinct when I'm trying something new or I'm learning something is to say, I don't know. And what's wrong with this? And so that time spent in trying to learn the thing or trying to get additional information to then come around to say, hey, this is something I'm pretty confident on. Even today, I wake up in the morning, I'm like, am I doing the right thing? Is this the right thing? Is it, am I missing something? I think that's a healthy way to have growth, is to constantly doubt yourself, which isn't the thing that your mom told you on your way to school. Hey, go to school, Joe, go to school and be doubtful. But if you go to school and you're doubtful and you don't trust exactly what you see and what you know, you spend the time to go get that information.
Nice. And so the book is called Less Than 1%. Now, we all jokingly know what a 1%er is, but let's break down, what does it mean to be less than 1%?
Yeah. So I'll give you the long-winded version of it. and I'm giving away the book a little bit. So spoiler alert, as my daughter
Well,
says.
don't give me too much. A lot of, just so
Yeah,
you know, when I do these, I don't want to spill the entire beans of the book, but I want to, like, what's the log line? Give me the log. I don't want to go
yeah,
deep. I want people to read the book. So tell
yeah.
me essentially, what does it mean to be less than 1%?
What it means is that it means to break out of your box. If you think about the box that's built for us, the box that was built for you was built for me. We sort of fall into that box, whatever it is. Figure out whatever you're supposed to do in life. And I think less than 1%ers are people who look at that box and say, you know what, that doesn't fit me. I want to do something different, or I want to be something greater. And I think that that's really describes what the less than 1%er is. It's those people who challenge norms, who want to break out of the box, who look at a situation and they say, I'm not just trying to incrementally get better. I really want to pursue greatness.
Now, that's easy for me to understand as someone who may be an entrepreneur or a kind of class, someone who
Yeah.
wants to break and do things. How do you identify these less than 1%ers in an organization and support them? Because I think there's got to be a fine line to that, right? Because you get it when you're an entrepreneur. You're like, hey, the buck stops with me. I'm the one leading the charge. But when you're part of an organization that maybe already has a structure already built into it, there's a way of doing things, but you still want to have people like that. Or like, I think the phrase is like an intrapreneur, like an entrepreneur mind within with a company. So how do companies support that within their organization? Because I think you want to have people like that, but at the same time, they sort of have to follow the pack as well.
Well, think about it. I think about what people perceive as corporate America, or corporate Canada, or wherever you're at. You've seen those banker conferences where everybody wears a suit, and that like 80% of those people have no business wearing a suit. That's not what they want. The minute they get to the airport, they rip it off and they put on what they really want. And so, how do you get everybody to be a less than 1%er? You focus on everybody's individual superpower, right? We're all so different. And I do a sort of a interrogation with people. And it is an interrogation where I sit down with them, I say, what's your superpower? And some people say, oh, well, I'm on time, or the classic one, oh, I work so hard. And those are not superpowers. The superpowers are individual to you. And wouldn't it be great if we lived in a world where everybody can use their superpower to impact their world, right? And I think everybody doesn't have to break molds, but you got to break your mold. And when you're working at your highest level and you're exhibiting your superpower, I think that you would, you can, not only can you achieve greatness, but the company can achieve greatness. I'll give one more example here. So have you read, I think it's John Maxwell's book, Seven Effective.
Go habits. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it still is like, I look on Amazon, try to find my book, and it's still number one. It's an amazing book. But think about it for a minute. You have 7 habits. So when I looked at myself, I'm like, man, I have habits 8 through 13, right? And so the fact that there are only 7 habits, or these are the habits that are for highly effective people, means that's a box. And if you don't fit into those 7 habits, then all of a sudden you feel like you're an outsider. And what's interesting about John is he wrote another book after the first book where it said 7, and there was an 8th habit. Well, I was like, wait a second, you put another habit. So the point is that we all have these amazing superpowers that if we just for a minute sit back and say, Moo, what are you the best at? If you can figure that out and you're authentically yourself, that's an amazing place to be on an individual basis, and definitely on a company-wide basis.
And for people to find talent, they use talent assessments, which are it's funny, actually, my friends have actually had their kids take a talent assessment test to see like what kind of like persona they are and everything like that. What's your take on them? So Moo, as a Gen Xer, I think some of it is bullshit. Like some of it is like very obvious. Like, yeah, oh, he's a go-getter. Okay, great. I could have gotten that from like a 10-second conversation with the person. What's your take on talent assessments?
Talent assessment. So this is you're hitting a nerve.
Okay.
You're hitting a nerve. All right. So the idea that you can take somebody and determine what they can be, could be, or will be by an arbitrary test is just crazy to me. I just don't get it. So I used to coach basketball, used to coach AAU basketball, when you go and travel all over the country, and we would get in these situations, and there would be ranking systems for 8th graders. So they'd use that talent assessment tool or whatever they're looking at, and they're saying, this right here is the number one 8th grade basketball player in the country. And I'm thinking to myself, this is so ridiculous, right? I mean, Steph Curry in high school was 256 or whatever. I mean, that was one of the services. I mean, he was all over the place. Some of the services that did talent assessments, he wasn't even ranked. And so the idea that in 8th grade or 4 years old or 25 years old or 50 years old, that you can take a rubric and push somebody into that rubric to determine how successful they to be, to me is just it's really something we do that is terrible. When you look at the people who are successful, none of them fit that rubric anyway. Do you think anybody thought that Steph Curry was going to be I mean, right now he's on pace to be maybe top 5, top 2 or 3 of all time. No one would have picked him. So to me, I don't believe in talent assessments at all. I think they're ridiculous.
Yeah, it is funny about them too, because it's like, I think we're all so desperate. I mean, it's almost going back to the beginning of our conversation. We're so desperate to see something on a paper. Like we need to have some sort of validation. So something telling us, oh, this is the person who should, because they answered these questions in a way. Because I think we have so much trouble with communicating and like really getting to know people. And again, a lot of these companies don't have the time for that. They just don't have the time. So especially when it comes to HR and talent management, it's like they've got 20 positions to fill in 30 days. Well, hell, what's going to make it easy for me? Oh, we have these assessments. Let's go to that, because it's much easier than having in-depth conversations with 500 people. So I get why they happen. So disruption, how can we disrupt that, Doc? Like, is there a way to improve on that? Like, it doesn't sound like you're a fan of them in general, but is there a way to maybe use it as a partial way to find people? Or what I mean, is there a way around it? Because I get the idea of like streamlining the process, because we all know, especially when it comes to jobs, there's going to be 1,000 candidates for a certain job, so you can't talk to 1,000 people. So tell me about, in terms of like parsing through all that information.
Yeah, that's a really good question. How do you, so what's the new standard that you can create to make sure that you disrupt that old standard? I think that the way to do it, it unfortunately, and it's very time consuming, is I think that if you do interviews and you want to interview 1,000 people, you have to talk to all of them. I think you really do. I mean, I think the idea that you can have them fill out something and figure out whether they're going to be good for your company or not is ridiculous. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to do it in a way where it's like you and I are doing it face to face or one on one. I mean, you may ask specific questions. Like one question I asked to every candidate that's applying for a job, I said, "What's your superpower?" And if they tell me, you know, like I said, it's being on time or it's working too hard, then we dive into it. How can we free people? You know, how can we free people so that when they're coming for the interview, they're bringing something different? And I think that's really the key. I fully believe that it's going to be a while before we get to the point where we can find greatness. Because of all the constructs we talked about earlier, I think it has to be the point where the individual has to go out and sort of prove their greatness, challenge that status quo. And it may mean that you might not get that job, or you might not get that opportunity, or you're the wrong person for that particular opportunity. But when you find that right place, you're going to be able to change the world. Just one thing, my talent assessment at 14, my 14-year-old talent assessment, I was going to be a soccer player or a basketball player and a rapper, as you can tell from my wall. That was where I was going. So if you told me at 14 that I'd be the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar healthcare company, I'd have not only would I tell you that you're wrong, everybody else who knew me at the time would tell you that. So that I'm living proof that, and I'm sure your story or anybody we talk to's story, that 14-year or 15-year-old talent assessment didn't pan out to where they ended up being in the future.
Well, if I was to identify your superpower, it has to be time management skills, because you're a CEO, physician, you help you through the 24/7 Foundation. How do you do it all? This is the question like women used to get in the 80s. How do you manage being a mother at a working? Like, how the hell do you do it? Because there seems like a lot going on in your life, Doc.
You just get it done. You remember when Kobe Bryant was 2 up in the finals and they asked him, said, "Hey, you don't look happy." you don't look happy. What's going on? And he kind of looked up, and he's actually a little mean to the reporter. He said, job finished? Is the job finished? So the third tenet of disruption is relentlessness. And so, I think that for me, I don't really know. I don't manage my time. I don't balance anything. I do everything 10,000%. And at some point I just fall off the wagon and fall asleep. But, I sometimes I think sleep is optional for me. But I think it's just that relentlessness to constantly pursue what you need to pursue. If you're engaged in the things that you want to do, and even engaged in the things that you don't want to do, you never get tired. You never get tired. So I'm excited about everything.
So I found something else you like less than talent assessment. And that's work-life balance. You do not believe in work-life balance.
I do not believe in work-life balance. I think it's something that is a point of it limits people's peace, because they constantly feel like there's this thing that's supposed to be right, and then they devastate themselves when they're on one side of the seesaw or another. And the truth is that if you just live your life through each moment you're in and enjoy it to its utmost, just make sure, like, even, my daughter, both my kids play college basketball. I don't miss their games. I'm at every one of their games. And that takes a level of logistics that's otherworldly. But I just feel like if you pursue everything as if it's the most important thing that you need to do, you're going to be out of balance. You're going to be a little tired. You might not get to work out in the morning, but that's how I live. I'm not recommending it. But I think that it's something that I believe that we've lost in this new world. Where I think that we've lost the idea that I have a duty as a father. I have a duty as a CEO. I have a duty as an author, and that responsibility means that I might not be balanced.
Fine. It works for you. I always say I take a very libertarian view when it comes to people's lives. Like, you got to do you.
Yeah.
So happy. There isn't like the work-life balance. Work-life balance may be necessary for some people, especially, of people dealing with mental health issues. You need to have some barriers. But folks like you, Doc, you're a psychopath. You're fine. You're fine with going 24/7. I'm the same way. I'm open.
And maybe in some sort of way, speaking of mental health, maybe in some sort of way, that is my mental health reprieve. Maybe going at it the way I go at it gives me a level of comfort. Because just to be honest, I get a little bit, if I don't bring my best game to everything I do, that bothers me and that weighs on me. And so I think, to your point, the balance I may be getting is just that relentlessness, that maniacal approach to things sort of keeps me going.
Awesome. I always like to wrap these up by taking people behind the dedication of the book, and you dedicate the book to Michael and Pauline Tomlinson. What we say isn't always what we mean. What we mean isn't always what we feel. What we feel isn't always what we say. Tell me about the importance. I'm assuming these are your parents that you decided to dedicate the book to?
Yeah.
So why?
Yeah, they, again, like my history, if you read the book, you'll find out a little bit of my history. I'm a little bit of I'm from and people ask me where I'm from in the airport, or, I go to an event and they say, where are you from? And I have to stop because it's a long explanation. So I'm of Jamaican descent, born in Canada, went to, the US when I was 18 to play basketball, then went through the Midwest for medical school and training, and then ended up in California. Now I'm in Dallas. And so I'm a Jamaican-Canadian who's now an American citizen. And, so I have a lot of different threads. And, I think the thread that is the most important is the thread we get from our parents, from our lineage, right? And that's why I dedicate the book to them, because, hey, that lineage, who I am today, that Jamaican descent is evident in the way I approach things. It's evident in the way I speak, evident in the way I think. And so I think it's really important. The statement that I wrote there at the beginning of the book, it's a paradox, right? It's a paradox. I love paradoxes. I love things that on face value look like we know what they mean. And then as we really sift through them, we see that they aren't exactly what we thought they were.
Awesome. Love it. He is Dr. Imamu Tomlinson. The book, Less Than 1%, How Disruptors Defy the Odds. Doc, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. I appreciate your time, Joe. Thank you so much for having me.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more about Dr. Tomlinson, his book, and our other fine authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.